Welcome to Nerdology, where we dive into the science behind consumer behavior, sensory research, and the latest hot topics in behavioral science. Quick insights, expert reviews, and conference highlights, all in bite-sized form. Let's get nerdy. Hi, it's Michelle Niedziela again with the Nerdoscientist podcast, and today I wanted to reflect on my experience at the 2025 Truth in Beauty e-Summit, recently hosted by the EcoWell. The summit brought together scientists, dermatologists, regulators, and industry voices to tackle one of the most pressing issues in beauty today, misinformation. We heard talks about the science of ingredient safety, how regulation is evolving, the role of influencers and social media in amplifying the myths, and the consumer psychology that drives these conversations. It was such a valuable lineup, and I was thrilled to contribute my perspective as a behavioral neuroscientist, looking at how behavioral science can explain why misinformation spreads, why it sticks, and what we can do to break the cycle. Now, I started by drawing on my background in sensory neuroscience. Our perceptions of taste, smell, and sensation really vary widely, and that opens the door to a lot of myths. So it could be something like, the tongue map. You've probably seen, the image showing sweet tip on the tip of the tongue or bitter on the back, salty on the sides. Looks neat, but it's totally wrong. We can perceive all sorts of basic tastes across the tongue. Still, that myth persists because it's simple and it's sticky. Also things like super tasters. Some people, because of genetic differences, can be super tasters. They can experience certain bitter compounds more intensely. That's true science. But as the story travels, it becomes hype with cookbooks and diet blogs and test kits you can buy online, all sorts of things like that. And the other example that I actually brought up was about neuromarketing and how the science behind how, neuroscience can be used to understand consumer experiences can be overblown and, often misleading when people sort of, you know, uh, speak beyond what the results of those studies really show. So, how does that happen? I discuss this thing that I call the misinformation feedback loop. That's how misinformation works, not as a one-way street, but as a loop, a feedback loop. Basically, it starts with a claim that spreads. Often it's emotionally sticky. Then consumers adopt and amplify it. Companies then have to respond with products and claims that match it. That industry validation reinforces that belief, and the loop just repeats and grows. We see this all over beauty. So, paraben-free labels reassure consumers, but they also enforce fear of safe ingredients. Neurocosmetics leverage brain-based language without strong scientific clarity. Blue light protection, skincare capitalizes on anxieties people have about screen time. These examples aren't even fringe, they're mainstream, and each turn of the loop makes the myth harder to break. And this becomes a real risk for brands. For companies, this strategy is tempting. In the short term, you gain trust, you get differentiation, and you may even see sales spikes. But the long-term risks can be serious. So you can get erosion of credibility when claims are challenged. You can have regulatory scrutiny when marketing overreaches. There can be consumer confusion and a lot of mistrust when these myths start to unravel. And then there's being boxed in, like clean beauty could be a trap where definitions keep shifting and brands can't then move beyond it when the story changes. So it's important to find ways of breaking out of that loop to make everything, the science better and our relationships with our consumers better. So there is a hopeful part, and that's that behavioral science can also show us how to break out of the loop, um, even though it is considerably much more challenging. For example, you can do what's called pre-bunking, because that's better than trying to, in the end, debunk. And this is the idea that you can inoculate people with sticky truths before myths can even take hold. You can also try to reframe. So you could position safety and science in emotionally resonant terms, which is how a lot of these myths become so attractive, is that they emotionally resonate for people. You can think about and consider choice architecture, like by making transparency and clarity the default options. Think about feedback intervention. Monitor the consumer sentiment in order to spot myths early on. And then also through collaboration with scientists, industry, and communicators, they really have to work together in order to build back that credibility. So, in closing, the Truth in Beauty e-Summit really reminded me that misinformation is not just about a science problem, or a marketing problem or even a consumer problem. It's really all of the above. We are all involved. It is a loop. But by applying behavioral science, we can understand that system and then intervene with empathy, evidence, and smarter communication. So, a huge thank you to Jen Novakovic and the EcoWell for organizing such a thoughtful and inspiring event. You can catch the full replay at the link that you can find with this podcast at theecowell.com. Thank you, everybody, and catch you next time.